Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. It's an election year, so what do you think we're squawking about? Yep, taxes. Yes, again. This time, Senator Ted Cruz joins us to discuss his no tax on tips bill.
Nobody will lose their job because of no taxes on tips. No business will go out of business.
But it will create shortages in other jobs where they're not making tips.
And he taught us the brief history of humankind in his bestseller Sapiens. Historian Yuval Noah Harari is back, taking on artificial intelligence.
The key thing to understand about AI, it's not a tool in our hands. It's an agent. It's an independent agent making decisions, inventing new things.
And the responsibility it places on us humans.
If you think that you just flood the world with information and the truth will float up, no, it will sink.
Plus, so much news today. The latest on the capital gains discourse, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, and the U.S. Open final, the hottest ticket in New York.
Taylor, and Travis Kelce.
And nobody was watching the match, they were watching them.
It's Monday, September 9th, 2024. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue, please.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin, and here we go this week. It comes after a very rough first week of September. The S&P 500 was down more than 4% last week, and that weaker jobs report on Friday didn't help matters. And a quick statistic for you, the S&P 500 has had an average decline of 1.2% in September, going back all the way to 1928. The Dow actually finished the week down nearly 3%. It was its worst week since March of last week. The Nasdaq was down by 5.75% last week. That was its worst week since January of 2022. That decline was led by the big cap tech names. You had Nvidia down by more than 12%. On Friday, for the first time since January of 2022, you had that uninversion between the 10-year and the 2-year. The yields actually moving back, where the 10-year is now at 375.7. The 2-year is at 370. So again, the first time that the spread between those two closed with the 10-year above it since all the way back to 2022. Joe, probably not a coincidence that it was the same since the NASDAQ has seen its worst week, going all the way back to January of 2022. You saw the numbers on Friday, and now the expectation that the Fed is really going to get underway.
Important week, definitely, and important morning. Nice bounce, little bounce after last week.
Yeah.
One of those that you look midday and sometimes just see what happened.
Some nervousness
maybe
around
be
it.
okay. Yeah. And so, you know what next month is?
October.
Yeah, that's all. That's my only point. Yeah.
October can be a little
next
scary.
Next month is October.
October has been a scary month before. We got a very busy week on the economic calendar. The markets will have two big inflation reports to digest, and the last one before the Fed's decision on September 18th. Wednesday, the Consumer Price Index will be released, following the Producer Price Index the following morning. Now, jobless claims also coming up on Thursday. Those numbers becoming more important as the Fed considers how deep to cut interest rates. The quarter point, half point debate will keep us pretty busy, I think, right up until that big day.
Let's get back to the topic of politics and your money. Senator Bernie Sanders wants a higher capital gains tax rate, going beyond the 28% that was proposed by Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris. Here's what Sanders said on Meet the Press.
So do you believe that 28% is enough, or should she come up? Should she boost that number?
I would go higher than that. Look, when you got 3 people on top owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society, and when billionaires pay an effective tax rate lower than truck drivers or nurses, you could substantially raise taxes on the billionaire class and the people on top.
Sanders has endorsed Harris, but has different views when it comes to the party's economic platform. Probably not breaking news on that front. We are going to talk taxes and much more with Senator Ted Cruz.
Since it was only a 3-set match, Ted probably won't be that sleepy-eyed and tired.
From the U.S. Open?
He was sitting with John Paulson.
Being in the very front row.
Front row.
Were you there?
I was there, but I did not. I saw him. I mean, I saw him across the way, but I didn't see Elon Musk, who was there.
Well, you know who Elon was with?
He was with David Zaslav.
You know who's next to Zaslav?
Barry Diller.
You know who's on the other side?
Bobby Kotick.
I had no words. It's just like, fine, it's tennis. That's all I could come up with. David had a grizzly old gray beard. He looks like a gray beard. I guess maybe, I don't know. How's he been doing? I guess he's okay. I didn't know it. You know what? A couple weeks ago, I think I was in Telluride, and I didn't shave immediately. And I was like that guy on Seinfeld.
Was it gray?
He shaved his head, the guy on Seinfeld, and when it came back, he realized he was bald. Yep. He's like, oh my God. It was like, because he wasn't bald before.
Was your beard gray?
Yes. The beard was like white. So that's what had happened.
I saw that as well.
Were you?
Elon had been.
Did you get hit with any? Let me answer this.
Elon, I was going to say, no, Elon had actually sat with Zaz at the Olympics for the opening ceremony as well.
Were you throwing balls back into the ball? The people that chase the balls. Were you that close where they were bouncing up into where your seat? Well, are you going to tell us?
We were close, but not.
You have the fam.
My son.
Oh, good.
Oh, that's
nice.
We were close. We were close.
And this tickets, finals.
Let's talk about sources here.
Did you have to borrow the money?
Sources telling CNBC that Norfolk Southern's board is investigating allegations against CEO Alan Shaw of engaging in an inappropriate workplace relationship. The company has confirmed it was probing Shaw over, quote, possible conduct that violated the company's code of ethics. Norfolk adding that it hired outside legal counsel to investigate the matter. Meantime, Shaw did not return requests from CNBC for comment.
A lot of other craziness going on there. Mahomes and Taylor Swift was there.
You're back to the Open. Yes, we saw them.
And Taylor, and Travis Kelce.
And nobody was watching the match. They were watching them.
I know. I was watching the match. I thought he was going to do it there for a while. Matthew McConaughey went from the University of Texas game.
Matthew, I saw Matthew right
Austin,
there. Yep.
Yeah.
Your friend Ari Emanuel was there.
Ari was there.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we'd be called friends.
He's not your friend?
Oh, you pay him to be your friend.
I pay him to be my friend. Yes, I pay him to be my friend. And, he's okay as a friend, but for what he gets paid, he could be a better friend. And Becky, just one other major thing that happened yesterday was Tom Brady made his debut.
His debut, yes.
For Fox. And he has a great partner, I will say. Kevin Burkhardt's voice is, the guy's a pro and knows what he's doing. And I think they got rid of Greg Olson, who never shut up, but it was pretty good. He was pretty good. Tom has practiced a lot, but he's a kind of a quiet guy in general, I think. He just how he talks through what he does. So I don't know. I don't know how you'd grade the first performance. $380 million is what his contract is. I don't know what Fox is thinking. I don't know what fans are thinking. It was trending, and I looked at a lot of the comments, and they were, as you might expect. The crazy thing is that Jordan Love hurt himself, the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, and it's everywhere.
That he might go back because he was
everywhere.
The one
Green Bay needs Tom Brady so badly, and that it's not completely out of the question.
Well, he was very into that
What's
idea.
that, Cantina?
He was very into that idea before the season and before
Giants
it started.
Too. I know, but, once you do it, we know Tony Romo from going out to the AT&T.
Yeah.
That guy. You sit down with him and there's 11 people, nobody has to do anything.
Well, Tom Brady was at the AT&T last year, and
Tony Romo's there. No, not one other person at the table during dinner for 2.5 hours has to say a word.
Right. No, you're saying about the
Tony Romo wants to talk.
Yes.
He wants to talk. Look, he will every waking thought.
I know another guy who likes to talk.
Every waking thought.
Tom Brady spent a year prepping for this, working for this job, like he does everything, and to not go into it and do it at that point, especially when he stepped away from football for that time. I can't imagine he would jump back in as much as he may want to.
Well, it does. It's a unique person that is able.
He'd probably be able to.
I will say, it's first time. It's his first game. I think maybe he needs to come.
We got a lot more
right here.
Sit right
here for a while.
We'll get him sitting there.
Warner Brothers Beetlejuice, topping the weekend box office, ranking in $110 million in its opening weekend. That makes it the second biggest September debut of all time, behind 2017's It. And the third biggest debut of the year so far is I know that Winona,
Beetlejuice.
she made it, don't say it 3 times, but she made it in there, looked like Willem Dafoe for a second. I don't know who else is in it. I don't think Alec Baldwin is in it, and I don't think Gina Davis is in it, but if they were dead people.
Can I make a confession? I never saw it. I never saw the original.
It was great, but they were dead people in the first movie.
Oh, I saw it years ago.
But they were dead people. Could they reprise their dead people? Are they still dead and around?
Why not?
So they could be ghosts that are still around in the second one. And Macaulay Culkin's mother was also from Home Alone was also in it. What's her name?
Oh, I love her.
Yeah.
She's from A Mighty Wind too. She's
Maureen O'Hara.
Yeah, she's great.
I don't know if the only people I saw were Michael Keaton, who was, if you haven't seen it, just for his performance, you should see him because it's amazing.
Great things about it.
He's amazing.
Looks so weird.
It is weird. People dead with their throats slit, and people that smoked and they're still
really
the ghosts are still smoking, and it comes out their chests and everything.
It's Catherine O'Hara, by the way, if you were shouting at Joe and Becky. The Canadian actress reprises her role from the 1989 original Beetlejuice. And we'll reprise our role, bringing you the best of Squawk Box, as our podcast continues after this break with Senator Ted Cruz, who is proposing legislation to make tips tax-free.
What California is doing, I think, is exactly backwards, where they jacked the minimum wage up so high that you're seeing restaurants going out of business.
And we're back. This is Squawk Pod.
And you are watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris has said that they support tax-free tips. Our next guest authored the No Tax on Tips Act. It has support from both sides of the aisle. Joining us now, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Senator, it's good to have you in. I think you're at a hostile audience here. I know.
Just on the tips.
Just on
That's
the tips.
all right.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
I feel confident that y'all are not getting paid through tips.
We are not.
But I have.
We are not, but
Okay,
we might ask to be paid in tips depending on how this goes.
Yeah, down the road, who knows, right? I used to work at McDonald's. No, wait a second. I guess I actually didn't. But it sounds good.
Well, you may be the next president,
yeah,
Joe. That's pretty good. That is a qualification.
I could be. Just explain what you do tell the rest of the world why they have to pay taxes on however they get compensation. But
well, listen, I'm not hearing a whole lot of people that are feeling grumpy that the waitress that the waitress at Denny's is not having to pay taxes on tips. You look at tips; it's people who are typically climbing the economic ladder. They're often just getting started, whether it's waiters and waitresses or taxi cab drivers, or bartenders or hairdressers or people who work in a nail salon. There are folks who are struggling. They're not tending to make a ton of money, and the paperwork and the burden of paying taxes on tips, I think it's not justified. I also think, I think Republicans, we are and should be the party of blue-collar workers, the party of jobs. President Trump came up with the idea. He announced it at the Vegas rally, and when I heard it, I said, that's a phenomenal idea. So I turned to my team, said, let's draft it. And, it says something. When I filed the bill within days, both of the Nevada senators, both Democrats, Catherine Cortez Masto and Jackie Rosen, came up and joined it immediately. And this is endorsed by both the National Restaurant Association and the Culinary Union. When you're bringing together all of the players, I think it's just a good idea.
Can I just lay out? And I understand where you're coming from. I get it. I was a waitress. Yeah. I earned $2.05 an hour.
Server, I believe, is the new.
I was a waitress and a bartender when that's what they were called.
Yeah.
The reason I did the job was for the tips.
Did you wear flair?
No, I didn't. I know it was not at Fridays, but the reason I did it was because of the tips.
Yeah.
I made a lot of money. Yeah. It was great. My daughter was a waitress, server this year.
Yeah, server.
And made a lot of tips. The reason that's a big complaint now is it was never something where it was really tracked before. So people were keeping that money and not paying tips. Now everything's electronic. You get paid out on your tips. And people are mad because they feel like they took a pay cut because they were never paying on the tips that were coming in before and weren't being tracked. My biggest problem with this is what it does for other employees who aren't. And I'm not talking a lot of others, but
teachers, nurses.
I have a special needs daughter. They have aides who are one-to-one aides. Mm-hmm. They make $16 an hour, maybe, sometimes less. And now you're going to have an incentive for them to go do other jobs, to go get tip jobs instead of doing the jobs where, it just creates, it's the unintended consequences.
Yeah, look,
what happens to that?
I get that argument, and I am a fan of broad-based tax reform. I think low taxes, you're mentioning different professions. Look, I think that's one of the big things at stake in this election and the difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. The Wall Street Journal calls this election the $6 trillion election because that's the delta between how much taxes will go up versus going down or being cut more. You'll recall when I ran for president, I ran on a simple flat tax of 16% simple flat tax for business, 10% simple flat tax for families and individuals. I think simplicity is a great approach to tax reform. But at the same time, I don't think the perfect should be the enemy of the good. And when you deal with tipped employees, there are often people who are struggling. They're struggling to raise young kids.
But there's a lot of employees who are W-2 employees who are struggling too.
And I'm for cutting their taxes too.
But when we went through the process of raising minimum wage at places like Walmart, Target, the fast food restaurants in California now, you can make $20 an hour for doing some of these things. It's great for the employees who are there, but it really draws from the other areas where they can't pay that same amount. It would make more sense to me to raise the earned income tax credit so that anybody making below a certain level can get taxes off. It just seems like a fairer way of going about it that does not create those unintended consequences.
So what I would say
is
what California is doing, I think, is exactly backwards, where they jacked the minimum wage up so high that you're seeing restaurants going out of business. You're seeing restaurants laying people off. You're seeing pizza.
This is essentially a tax. This is essentially a wage increase for workers in certain jobs and not in others.
Right, but it's not coming out of the hide of the employer, so nobody will lose their job because of no taxes on tips. No business will go out of business.
But
California's
it will create
idea,
shortages in other jobs where they're not making tips. Everybody's going to want to be paid in a tip basis.
So that argument I actually think is specious. The thing that everyone will get paid on tips.
Let's take that out of it.
Let me tell you why, actually, because it gets said a lot. But look, the IRS already defines tax fraud. So you can't have a lawyer who says instead of an hourly bill, I just have my whole compensation
on tips. I get that.
Tips.
So let's take that off.
You get prosecuted for that because that's not a cash tip.
Let's go back to the point that I think you agree with me on, which is that this creates an unfair standard so that not everybody is getting the same basis. Even though if you're making that same amount somewhere else, but you're not getting paid in tips. And I'm not talking about extending this for everybody, for lawyers or other people who are certainly doing fine. What I'm talking about is for people who don't make enough money and then inequity that is going to create in those spaces and how hard it's going to be to find workers in those spaces, which a lot of times if they're nurses' aides, if they're teachers' aides, if they're doing the work that these people are doing God's work. And it creates a huge inequity. And as somebody who has tried to find people here and the huge turnover you see in those areas, it's heartbreaking.
Look, that's why I'm for cutting taxes. And we've got most of the 2017 tax cuts that are expiring next year. And that is a big issue that is at stake in the presidential. It's a big issue in my race. I've got a tough reelect in Texas. I was just endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And the reason the Chamber endorsed me is they said, look, Ted spent 12 years leading the fight for jobs in the Senate. If Republicans take the majority, I'll be the next chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. That has jurisdiction over about 40% of the U.S. economy. It's a big deal for cutting taxes. It's a big deal for ending the war on energy and oil and gas that has driven up inflation so powerfully. It's also a big deal for things like spectrum and AI. If I'm the chairman of the Commerce Committee, we're going to move major amounts of spectrum into the private sector. That generates billions in investment, thousands of new jobs. And right now, unfortunately, we're falling behind China and other places in terms of making spectrum available.
Let me ask you a question about reducing taxes.
Yeah.
Because that's, I know, something you want to do. But you also have talked over the time about how Americans should have some semblance of skin in the game at the same time. So currently, the 12% bracket goes up to $44,725. That's the number, 12% for that. Once you get some of the child tax credits and other things in there, right, there is no tax, effectively. The 22, then you jump to a 22% bracket. That goes from $44,725 to $95,000, effectively. I don't know if you think you want to bring that bracket down. Then you go, obviously, to this 24% bracket, which goes up to $182,000. The reason I'm mentioning the actual brackets and the actual numbers is because there's not huge amounts of room to move if you're planning to try to bring in some revenue and then not make it progressive on the other side for the very wealthy.
So, Andrew, as I said, what I think the right approach to do is simplicity. I've introduced a simple flat tax for individuals. There's a big standard deduction, and then it's 10% across the board for everybody. And it also doesn't matter if it's ordinary income, if it's cap gains, long-term, short-term. None of that matters. Everything is 10%. So you think right now all the decisions that are being made in this town on tax avoidance, all of the capital that's being invested just because of tax strategy, if everything is being taxed at 10%, you actually invest money where you get the greatest returns. That has enormous efficiency gains. You know, when my simple tax cut was scored, it produced double-digit increases in after-tax income for every income decile, from the lowest earning to the highest earning across the board.
I'm sure, but then what does it do to revenue? Because the truth is, as you know, at 10%, even the wealthiest are paying more than 10%.
Well, what it does to revenue, and look, a significant component, there's also a business component at 16%. What I would say on revenue, if you look at the 2017 tax cuts, there were all of these negative voices saying this is going to devastate revenue. We now know they were all wrong because we passed the 2017 tax cuts and federal revenue went up year after year after year. It significantly increased federal revenue. And one of the big reasons is because it generated incredible growth. I mean, when Trump was president, we had a Republican Senate, Republican House. We produced the lowest unemployment in 50 years. We produced the lowest African-American unemployment ever recorded and the lowest Hispanic unemployment ever recorded. And so where do I want to get my revenue? I want to get my revenue by economic growth and more people getting jobs.
After the pandemic.
But the reason why, but hold on, it becomes more complicated. Look, it is absolutely true that during the Trump administration, revenue grew and our economy grew exceptionally. It's also true that after the financial crisis of 2008, there was a struggle period of, call it, 8 years. It is unclear whether you would have been able to get that kind of revenue had you put some of these policies in place in 2009, 10, 11, or 12, meaning you needed to get the economy back to there's an argument to be made that there was a period of time where the economy was getting its sea legs, and it just so happened from a timing perspective that Trump gets in office, he puts these policies in place, and they do help supercharge it. I don't think anyone's going to dismiss that. But, you know, in terms of how you measure what was actually happening in reality.
That's how I see the whole Obama administration.
Well, and on that point, Joe, it's interesting. I mean, look, you guys work in finance. I work in politics. You just described, Andrew, a struggle period from 2008 to 2016, and my immediate reaction is where Joe went. Well, gosh, who was in the White House then? Someone named Barack Obama.
But look, we got to the struggle period because of a whole number of steps that happened. By the way, you go back into Clinton's era, and then you can talk about George Bush's period of time, who was on the job and on the clock during the financial crisis.
Yeah, but people who reduced the housing market were all Democrats like Cuomo. In
that's why I said that you could go back and we could talk about all sorts of things.
If you really want to know what happened, is Ronald Reagan came in 1980, and we took off since then, ended the Cold War.
The government started spending more money. Talk about government spending.
You know why?
During that period.
To defeat the Cold War.
I'm not dismissing that's what happened. But it's been the spending.
It cost money to save the world and usher in 40 years of prosperity. So figure it, it was worth it. Some things are worth it. Senator, thanks.
Some things are worth it.
Some things are worth it.
But at least let's be honest about what happened.
Yeah, we had to build up the military.
Star Wars. Hello. The government started spending out
Star Wars.
Senator Cruz.
Senator Cruz, thank you.
No, but let him finish.
This is fun. I will say just this. Policies have consequences. It's not just an accident that when Barack Obama was there, we had economic stagnation. When Barack Obama was in office, we had high taxes and job-killing regulations. When Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in office, we have high taxes and job-killing regulations. We've had 4 years of their waging a war on energy, combined with spending trillions of dollars we don't have that has produced the inflation we have. On the other hand, when you have Republicans, hopefully, not always, but hopefully you cut taxes.
Every Kamala Harris policy is one of Trump's anyway. So the same.
Well, she is pretending, but you know, Bernie said don't worry about what she's saying because everyone knows she's not telling the truth. That she's going to be the same hard left vote that she's been since she arrived in the Senate.
Good luck in Texas. I can't imagine there'd be a Texas without Cruz. Could there be?
Well, look.
What's the numbers right now?
So there have been two polls in the last 2 weeks that show it as a 2-point race. And Chuck Schumer has been explicit. I'm his number one target in the country. He's spending over $100 million in the race. So I would say to folks at home, go to tedcruz.org because I need the help. We are getting, it was striking.
You did say. What do you mean you would say?
Well, I could say it again. Go to tedcruz.org. Right. Did you see at the Chicago DNC convention?
You're still going on. I saw you. We said we saw you at tennis. Yeah. What's your last point?
So at the Chicago DNC convention, when my Democrat opponent spoke for a couple of minutes, the entire stadium spontaneously began chanting, "Beat Ted Cruz." 20,000 Democrats. I was the only one who got that treatment. I'm actually pretty proud of that. But he also raised $1 million in 24 hours because if you're a hard partisan Democrat, after Trump, the person you want to most beat is me.
Your seatmate at the U.S. Open, John Paulson.
Yeah.
Will he be the Treasury Secretary if former President Trump becomes the president?
I could see that very easily. I think he'd be a very strong choice.
And will Pat Paulson run for president again? See you later. Thank you.
Cheese will be next.
If you've read the best-selling book Sapiens, you'll want to stick around for what's next on Squawk Pod. And if you haven't, you should definitely stick around because its author, Yuval Noah Harari, has a new book out, this time on artificial intelligence, what it's doing to humanity, and how we can control it.
What we should say to Twitter and Facebook and so forth, you're not responsible for what your users are writing. But if your algorithms decide to promote, to disseminate a specific...
But what happens if your algorithm is writing it?
Then you're definitely liable.
This fascinating conversation is right after this. You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC. Here's Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Up and Andrew, Q.
Our next guest is a best-selling author and historian, Yuval Noah Harari. This week, he has a new book out. It is titled Nexus, A Brief History of Information Networks from the Stone Age to AI. And I've been reading him all the way back to Sapiens. You've sold now 65 million books. It's a remarkable situation. But this book really takes a look at information and AI. And I want to talk about AI in terms of elections and so many other things. But really, why don't we start with its impact on the financial market, since that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
How do you think it's going to change things? And most of this book argues that actually that AI is very dangerous. Is there a possibility that, at least in the financial world, it's helpful?
It's not a question of helpful or dangerous. It's the magnitude of the change. I mean, basically, if today, how many people understand the financial system? Less than 1% of humanity, I think, would be a fair guess. So in 10 years, it could be exactly zero. I mean,
because we're not going to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes.
Yes, because AI will take over more and more of the managerial jobs in finance and will start inventing new financial devices, which are orders of magnitude more complicated than anything we know today. And it's just beyond the human capacity. I mean, finance is the ideal playing ground for AI because it's a purely informational and mathematical realm. To put a self-driving car on the road is very difficult, as we've learned in the last 10 years, because you need to interact with physical reality and social reality. But in the financial system, it's just numbers. You just tell the AI, make as many dollars as you can, and it can invent new strategies and new financial devices that people have difficulty understanding and therefore regulating.
What do you think of most of the algorithms that are working today in the markets? Mm-hmm. Because most of it is trying to predict or at least play off of the sentiment, right? The way everybody's thinking.
Yeah.
But you're saying that the thinking part of it is going to diminish.
On the one hand, to diminish. On the other hand, the ability of AIs to manipulate humans will increase, to manipulate our attention. And this is the key thing to understand about AI. It's not a tool in our hands. It's an agent. It's an independent agent making decisions, inventing new things. And therefore, it has a potential to change every area. Finance, the military, religion, in ways that we never saw before in history. We never created an agent. Everything we created before was just a tool.
This is a business show, but you think it's going to change religion?
Yes.
How so?
Think about a holy text that can talk back to you. I mean, humans have been dreaming about texts created by a superhuman intelligence throughout history. But all the texts that they created so far, like the Bible or the Quran or whatever, they couldn't talk back. You always needed humans to interpret them. Now you can have a text created by a superhuman intelligence that can talk back to you and that can interpret itself if you don't understand something in the text.
Let me ask you a different question about what some people think of as a religion, Silicon Valley. There are folks in Silicon Valley that love you. Bill Gates has been a big supporter of your books in the past, and Mark Zuckerberg and others. But a lot of what you write about is quite critical of Silicon Valley, and specifically the companies, including OpenAI and Microsoft and Google and so on. What's the relationship you have now with those folks? Because you used to be greeted like a god talking about religion in the Valley. I don't know if you'll be greeted the same way after this book.
We'll see what happens after this book. But the basic message is you have to take responsibility for the actions of your algorithms. You know, especially when it comes to social media, they always try to protect themselves by appealing to freedom of speech, that we don't want to censor our users. And I agree, we should be very, very careful about censoring human users, but the companies need to take responsibility for their algorithms.
And you write about this idea that you believe that the companies need to have true liability for the algorithm itself. We've been having this liability debate, as you know, in the social media landscape, Section 230, for a very, very long time. And it hasn't happened, right? So social media has not been liable for either the content itself.
Because it muddies the water. Whenever you raise the issue, they go to freedom of speech. We are not responsible for what our users say, and we don't want to censor them, and I generally agree. But, you know, it's basically like, I don't know, the editor of the New York Times. If he or she publishes something on the front page, they can't say that I'm not responsible for my choice to put it on the first page. What we should say to Twitter and Facebook and so forth, you're not responsible for what your users are writing. But if your algorithms decide to promote, to disseminate a
But what happens if your algorithm is writing it? If the algorithm is writing
then you're definitely liable for what your algorithm is writing. And again, this is a huge change, because previously the algorithms only pushed human content. Now they can create it.
Where do you land on somebody like Elon Musk, who's made the argument and bought Twitter with this idea that information should be free, and that information not only should be free, but will inform and help a thriving democracy?
Information isn't truth. Most information in the world is junk. Most information is lies and fantasies and fictions. The truth is a rare and costly and complicated kind of information.
But do we want the fantasy then? Or should fantasy be allowed?
Yes, it should be legal. I mean, we're not saying ban it, but if you think that you just flood the world with information and the truth will float up, no, it will sink. This is why you need institutions like newspapers, like universities, like courts, who specialize in sifting through this mass of information.
Mark Zuckerberg, as you know, just a couple of weeks ago now, came out and said that he had misgivings, would be the best way to say it, about some of the information that their algorithm was effectively suppressing during the pandemic as it relates to COVID and vaccines and all sorts of other things. And so the question is, should the algorithm be suppressing certain information or not, right? This goes to the sort of Elon Musk argument, which is to say just let it all out there and that we are smart enough to figure it out.
Should the editor of the New York Times have any kind of responsibility for what they publish on the front page? Or should they just say, well, it's all information, let's put the first thing that comes up? People have been grappling with this question for thousands of years. This is the basic question of journalists, of historians, of judges. How do I tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information? And if you now run some of the biggest media companies in the world, which is what Twitter and Facebook are, and you can't deal with it, then if you can't bear the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you don't know how to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information, you have no business in media. You have no business in shaping the public conversation and deciding what will be at the center of attention and what will be on the side. We are not talking censorship. People have a right even to tell lies. It's most cases, at least, it's legal to lie. We do it all the time. But as the manager of a major media company that decides where the attention of the public goes, you have a responsibility to know how to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information.
You layer AI on top of it, and it gets a lot more complicated. Yuval, the book is called Nexus. It is at the center of everything, and we appreciate you being with us. Congratulations
Thank you.
on the publication of it. Thank you.
That's Squawk Pod for today, the first day of a busy week. Thanks for spending part of your Monday with us. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern to get the smartest takes and analysis from our TV show right into your ears. Please follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. We'll meet you back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.